there, soulmates. A lot to talk about on this Thursday, February 9th. Some of the stories we're following include students across the nation protesting in response to racist acts, and a 6-year-old is sexually attacked on a Houston school bus. Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report. I'm Courtney Hicks.
And I'm Nicordelai Corte. We'll also have the best cities to celebrate Black History Month and the controversial bill to create a separate court in Mississippi. Those are the stories that are impacting our people.
As we bring you our news, our views, and our voice. So, topping the news today, it's being called the most oppressive legislation in Jackson's history. The Republican-dominated Mississippi House of Representatives has passed a bill to create a separate, unelected court system in the city of Jackson that would fall outside of the authority of city voters, the majority of whom are Black. Now, the bill, which local leaders have linked to apartheid-era laws and described as unconstitutional, would also expand a separate Capitol Police force overseen by state authorities. Now, according to reports, the force would expand into all of the city's white-majority neighborhoods.
That's right. The passing of this bill has struck tensions to rise throughout the state, as Jackson is one of the blackest cities in the country. This week, Jackson's mayor, Lumumba, said it's, quote, oppressive because it strips the right of Black folks to vote. It's oppressive because it puts a military force over people that have no accountability to them. It's oppressive because there will be judges who will determine sentences over people's lives. It's oppressive because it redirects their tax dollars to something they don't endorse nor believe in. Here to discuss the Mississippi court and other important issues impacting Black Americans is Yumeka Rushing, NAACP Chief Strategy Officer. Welcome, Yumeka, and thank you for joining us here on Fox Soul's Black Report.
Hey there, thank you for having me.
Oh, we appreciate you so much. All right, so let's dive right into it. Can you break down for us the impact of having unelected courts in Mississippi? This blew the mind of lots of folks. Top discussion today. Have at it.
Well, Mississippi is obviously trying really hard to live up to its history here. The racism playbook has been around for a long time, but what we're seeing over the last few years is that it has some new chapters, and we're really trying hard to combat what we would call the new Jim Crow. Kill the Black vote, kill the Black voice, kill Black bodies, and now steal the ability of Black folks to govern and have equal representation. It's just something that we ought to all stand up all over the nation and cry out about. And certainly that's what the NAACP is doing.
And speaking of killing Black bodies, we know that the DOJ is now investigating the Jackson water crisis, which has had an outsized effect on the Black folks in the community of Jackson. Headlines have faded on the matter, unfortunately, but can you tell our viewers, why should we still be paying attention? And what's the status of the Jackson City water crisis, again, predominantly impacting Black folks?
Well, the headlines certainly haven't faded here, as we still have families struggling with the basic right to water. You know, this is something that we all deserve. It's just the basics. We should be talking in 2023 about the fundamental right to have clean, accessible drinking water. But year over year, Jackson has certainly struggled with this. We are starting to see some new federal resources come in, $600 million coming in to help with the infrastructure around Jackson. And we hope that we'll begin to see a difference. But the legislature is fighting all of this. Of course, now the question is who controls the money and who governs the ability to ensure that it does what it's meant to do. And so the NAACP is certainly standing with families and standing with the community as we want to make sure that these dollars are allocated to fix these long-standing issues in this historically Black city.
If you don't mind, Yumeka, there's so much to cover while we have you here. Let's shift to the attack on Black history as it continues in this country, being led somewhat by Southern governors leading that charge. So what is the NAACP doing and will continue to do to protect Black history, seeing as though we're just about in the middle of Black History Month, especially?
You know, we've got to center this debate around children and around around history. Certainly, Black history is American history, and we want to ensure that our stories are told. And there's no way to really sugarcoat what has happened. It's not a pretty story, slavery and all of the things that inequities that our ancestors endured, but it is our truth and it is our story. And it deserves to be told. And we've got to just ensure that all of these attacks to dismantle the truth around the country really are met with the type of force that is needed. Black history is American history, and we want to ensure that all young people, all people of all ages, have an opportunity to understand that history and to learn from it so that we certainly don't repeat those mistakes.
That's right.
And speaking of repeating mistakes, we know throughout our history, police misconduct has been an issue that we've had to deal with for generations. We saw this week during the President's State of the Union speech, there were a number of members of the Congressional Black Caucus that were wearing 1870 pins to underscore that historical moment where the first Black unarmed free man was shot and killed by police officers in Philadelphia. Can you just share with us just sort of a few highlights from the State of the Union address, and more importantly, what can we expect from the NAACP in the coming days and weeks, especially when it comes to the issue of police reform that continues to stay in the headlines?
I'll tell you, I had the privilege of being in that room, and it was just awe-inspiring in many respects to look around and see what our ancestors have built, and then to see our leaders coming together to try to govern. We thought it was a strong speech, and we thought that it included many of the things that African Americans across the nation care about. But it also isn't enough. You'll notice that in the remarks, the president kept saying, we've got to get there. We've got to move forward. We've started some things, but we've got to finish now. And so that's what we're all waiting on. We're waiting for the finish. It was an incredible moment when Tyree, the parents stood up, and we had an opportunity to just honor them and the loss of their child. But we're seeing too much of this around the country, and the moment felt eerily familiar to stand up as we sat at the feet of another set of Black parents mourning the loss of their child. So we've got to have some real police reform. We've got to get serious about it, and we've got to come together as a nation and demand action. That's certainly what the NAACP is doing and will continue to do so. I think in the words of our president, every time that we fail to write a piece of legislation that really cures this, we write another obituary. And so we don't want to write any more obituaries.
Yeah, well said. Yumeka Rushing with the NAACP. Thank you so much for joining us today. An official soulmate now. We must definitely have you back as the agenda continues. We thank you, as we always say, for getting into that good trouble. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Now, the officer involved in the death of 26-year-old African immigrant Patrick Loyoya is asking for a wrongful death suit to be dismissed under qualified immunity. The officer who shot and killed Loyoya is Christopher Schur. According to court documents, Schur's attorney argued in a court filing that he is protected by qualified immunity, which shields law enforcement and government officials from civil liability when carrying out their duties, and claim he did not violate Loyoya's Fourth Amendment protections. Schur, who is white, pulled over Loyoya on April 4th, 2022 for having a license plate that didn't match the car he was driving. That
resulted in him being shot in the head and killed. It's still a very disturbing video. You know, as these videos are available or as they are released, whether it's body cam footage or, footage that, a spectator, if you will, or witness kind of videos, they're very disturbing to watch. And I haven't really been able to get through any of them, starting pretty much with George Floyd. As the victims start calling out for help, pleading for their lives, calling for their mamas, I can't take it. And in particular, Tyree Nichols with this talk of 20 more hours of footage available. This particular footage with this case, it happened in our backyard in Grand Rapids, which is the second largest city in Michigan, a couple of hours away west of Detroit. It is just, it rips your heart out because clearly at some point he had him subdued, and the fact that he was, according to reports, shot in the back of the head, it's just absolutely disgusting.
And it's also important to note that the filing also claims that it was objectively unreasonable for Sher to shoot Loyola. The shooting death of Patrick Loyola also, although tragic, was objectively reasonable and a product of an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer. You know, this is a part of what this issue is all about. This is a part of why we're at an impasse in Congress when it comes to meaningful police reform. Qualified immunity allows for any officer that really fears for their lives to be able to use lethal force.
That's right.
And I think what a lot of activists are arguing across the country is, let's at a bare minimum raise the threshold by which officers are able to claim qualified immunity. I mean, this guy was pulled over because his license plate looked suspicious.
Yeah.
And he ended up dead, shot in the back of the head, as you mentioned.
Yeah, but these police officers then become judge and jury, and that is not fair, as we know how our law works, and that is why these policies must continue to be argued and argued down and argued off of, you know, the plate, really, for it to be an alternative or an option, as far as I'm concerned.
And to your point, Courtney, officers out there acting as judge, jury, and executioner, that's just not sustainable.
You can't forget executioner, because that's exactly what this looks like, appears to be, and what the videotape displays. All right, we're moving along here to more police matters. An increasing number of black police chiefs are facing intense pushback from officers as they press for reform. There is also anger from citizens scarred by a history of mistreatment by police. Chief John Drake, he's in Nashville. Chief Daniel Hahn, he is in Sacramento, and Boston Police Commissioner Michael Cox are joined by numerous black chiefs across the nation who admitted to facing a lot of backlash when trying to create a positive image for law enforcement. In 2020, the Bureau of Justice Statistics at the Department of Justice reported that just 6% of chiefs from local police departments were black, and much more likely to be black in departments serving 250,000 or more residents.
And it's important to note that the commissioner in Boston, Commissioner Cox, he was beaten by fellow officers back in 1995. They mistook him for a suspect in an incident that was covered up until Cox won a $1 million civil rights lawsuit, right? And so very rare example of somebody surviving police violence and actually becoming a police chief. But, you know, we know this story all too well. To put black folks in positions of power, but to disempower them from having the folks underneath them that are aligned, you know, with a new set of thinking, a new mindset, is a recipe for more of the same. And so, yes, we're seeing very, very, very slowly more black police chiefs, more black police officers, but let's not make no mistake about it. Law enforcement is still overwhelmingly white, and there are you don't have to take my word for it. There's research out there that dates back to the early 2000s that talks about the infiltration of white supremacy in law enforcement, right? And so you need more than just a black face in a high place in order to make a difference. You
know, it's just interesting to me as black officers, how they balance and manage, you know, the blue and the black. You know, and I often feel like that's a conversation that isn't had a lot. You know, that's got to be tough, you know, to balance that. And that's what makes the Nichols case so significant and different, because, you know, it was black on black. So, you know, I would like to hear, you know, from police officers, from chiefs who handle the blue and the black rub there. I mean, that you know, that in my opinion, that would have to be significant, how they handle that. What filter do they use? As most of that stuff, the things that we've talked about, most of these things have been, you know, the racial divide, if you will. That's got to be a tough position to be in.
But you know what, Courtney, part of this is really, it's an unfair question. And it's because it's a question that white police chiefs don't have to deal with, right? If you are a black police chief, you know, you're having to deal with issues related to racial justice, justice in a way that your white colleagues don't have to. They're not going back home in the neighborhoods or back to churches or back to, family cookouts with folks that are oftentimes mistaken as suspects, right? Who are thought ill of, before they are afforded their due process. And so we'll continue to keep our eye on this.
I think it's a double-edged sword to be black and blue.
Yeah. More to say on this, but now off to Houston, where a family is horrified at what they say happened to their 6-year-old on an Aldine ISD bus. The child's mom says that her son was repeatedly sexually assaulted in the back of the bus by an older student. Latoya Monroe first heard the assault last week, but she says, according to security footage, they started months ago. The child's mom said that she asked school transportation officials to look at the bus cameras after her son's backpack went missing. Now, that's when she got a call from the school with the news that no parent could ever imagine. Now that the mom and community leaders are demanding accountability, this story is spreading like wildfire.
It is. And I want to, clear up, just in case there's any misconceptions. This is a black mom, a black student who has been riding this bus, frequently, because now there are reports saying that these sexual attacks have been ongoing. The young boy left behind a backpack. She approached the school officials to find it. They used the video to locate where the backpack was, and here they've come across this video of this baby being sexually assaulted, I want to say towards the back of the bus. The driver thought that maybe there was some sort of scuffle going on, a fight. And so bits and pieces are all still coming together. I'm just disturbed by the fact that I remember back in my day, buses were separated. You had elementary school, you had middle school, you had high school, and if there was a mix, we were talking earlier, that there would be some adult supervision. So I'm a little concerned about that. And if this has been ongoing, how is this happening on adult supervision watch, or that may show that there is no adult supervision at all on these buses? Yeah,
and to your point, I think part of what a lot of people who are just cringing as they're hearing this story or as they're reading the story, how many other young people has this happened to? We wouldn't have known about this story if the child hadn't lost the backpack, number one. Number two, if the mom hadn't reached out to school officials to say, hey, can you take a look at that bus footage to see what happened to his backpack? And three, if school officials didn't cop to what they actually saw on that video. And so I think one very important question is, has this happened before, and how many other young people has this happened to in the Houston area and perhaps other parts of the country?
And should those age groups be mixed like that on buses without supervision, adult supervision? A lot of questions to be answered. We'll definitely keep on top of that story. Here's another story, soulmates, that you may or may not have heard of. Very disturbing as well. The Archdiocese of Philadelphia is investigating after students from a Catholic school were seen on video using racist language. In the video posted to social media, one student from St. Hubert's Catholic School for Girls sprays another's face with black paint while screaming, "Know your roots," and "You're nothing but a slave." Now, the girl in blackface then responds, "I'm black and I'm proud." The Archdiocese has condemned the student's actions and has promised that all those responsible will be disciplined appropriately.
In New Jersey, over 100 high school students walked out of class for a second day of protests over allegations of racism at Collingswood High School. Students left the building shortly before noon. During the peaceful 2-hour protest, students cited a list of allegations against school officials, including racial profiling. The group included students of all races, some waving signs that read "Black Lives Matter." Several students said black classmates are disproportionately disciplined. Now, the school enrolls about 750 students in grades 9 through 12 and is 16% black. Black lives sure do matter, and good for these students, for exercising their voice, exercising their agency, and really standing up in a peaceful way. In a peaceful way.
But I think it's the circumstances are tragic, whether it be race relations or mass shootings in schools. But on the other side of it, if you can squeeze a little positivity out of it, because of these circumstances, because this is what the Gen Zs essentially are dealing with, they have produced so many leaders, very young leaders. And a lot of these movements have always been grounded, if you will, in youth and youth activism. And so, if you can find a positive as to, what has, aside from what has prompted them to become activists in regards to, losing their classmates to mass shootings, in regards to having to deal with, racial discrimination while in school, I think the fact that they are galvanizing and producing leaders among leaders is in fact a positive. And it keeps me encouraged because, from generation to generation, as you go older, you go, oh my God, those kids. But they really have a handle. A lot of them really have a handle and are very conscious and aware of what is happening and how they can be a part of the change, even at such young ages. And
it's also important to point out these last two stories, that these stories are examples of what's happening on school campuses. And so whether you think your kids are safe if you send them to a private school, right? Or, if you don't, right? There is a climate on campus where issues related to racial injustice are clear and present, and are oftentimes keep creating environments that are unsafe, for Black students, for students of color. And we've got to do something about it, and you can't wait for federal legislation or for your state to pass legislation, but, each school community, has to step forward and say enough is enough. I mean, to spray paint your classmate and, to share those sort of disparaging words. I mean, that is the kind of stuff that breaks young people's spirit.
Yeah, and these young people, they're not waiting on these adults either to get it right.
Enough has got to be enough.
Indeed. Let's move on here. A group that champions the separation of church and state is demanding the University of Colorado censor any religious exercises, that's in quotes there, that Deion Sanders, that's coach, may intend to practice with team players and staff. The Freedom from Religion Foundation claims that Sanders has been engaging in, quote, inappropriate and unconstitutional actions by engaging in religious exercises with players and staff members. This all comes from a December 20th official staff meeting where Sanders decided to open the prayer meeting, or the meeting with, you got it, prayer. The organization also claims that on January 16th, Sanders instructed another staff member to lead the players in prayer before the start of a team meeting. The University of Colorado responded to that organization's letter and said Sanders has received training and guidance on boundaries, and that is a quote. And I know Coach Sanders knows he is in a whole different world based upon his current and continuing actions. I don't think he cares. He's a man of faith, and that's what he's going to do and how he's going to continue to operate. But he has to understand he's in a different world and he's going to receive some pushback. And I don't know if he'll win that battle just because, that organization has a point.
Well, every organization has its culture, and from the story, I didn't read that he was pushing people to pray with him. It seemed like he gave people the opportunity to opt in, but that's the difference between that Jackson State culture and that Colorado culture. Because
we gonna pray before any kind of meeting, ain't we?
And I'm sure there are plenty of people in Colorado that may have joined him in the prayer.
Sure.
But we also have to keep in mind that there are people among us that are not believers, right? And so creating a space that allows everybody to feel like they belong, and that's probably
different
what rubs people the wrong way.
Different filters.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We shall.
How that works out.
We sure will. Okay, Coach Primetime. Coming up, a new study is revealing shocking details regarding Black business owners.
Plus, a growing rise in Black parents enrolling their kids in homeschool. We'll tell you why when we return. You're watching Fox Soul's Black Report.